Are realistic fencing techniques viable in half sword? Well, let's go through some techniques and see exactly how well they work. The first technique is called the flèche. In French, this literally means arrow, and that's exactly what you become. Letting your sword guide you, you go flying at your opponent and try to stab them. This is a very aggressive technique and can be very rewarding, but it also can be very dangerous as you can get hit as well. In half sword, this is really easy to do. You simply stab and charge at your opponent, and it usually catches the AI off guard because you hit them before they're even ready for the fight. This move really does catch people off guard. Modern fencers use this technique all the time, and it works specifically well in half sword because the AI have really big holes in their guard. It's also really satisfying to win the match in a single stab. I recommend you guys try it out. The next technique is the repost. You guys have definitely heard of this before. It's a very fundamental technique in fencing, being able to parry and then immediately counterattack. But in half sword, parrying can pose quite a problem, especially since auto parry makes your character move his weapon to intercept the enemy's weapon, and that can get in the way of making consistent parry reposts. Like this instance here, where my character moved my sword out of the way, and it would have parried the enemy's attack if my character didn't do that. Riposts are such a great technique to use in half sword because the AI doesn't chain attacks together very quickly, which means if you parry, you then have the right of way. So riposting and attacking directly after is your best shot at being able to attack without getting hit yourself. The next technique is more of a principle, and that's the Knocklot, which is a German longsword fencing term which means to travel after. Now what this is talking about is when your opponent swings and misses, it leaves an opening for you to attack and travel after them. And if you don't know what the Fool's Guard is, this is exactly what it's used for. To bait an attack and then punish a miss. The best part about the Fool's Guard in half sword is that the bots will keep falling for it over and over again. But there is another part of Knocklot. It's what modern fencing calls attacking into preparation, and it's also where the idea of chambering comes from with games like Mordhau. So instead of attacking after they miss, you're attacking while they're getting ready to attack. So while they're pulling their sword back, you go forward and travel after them. Here's an example where my opponent raises his arm for a cut, and as soon as I can react, I go in and stab. The bots in this game love to swing and miss, so if you're not incorporating this into your fighting repertoire, then you're really missing out. But just keep in mind that generally you should be traveling after a stab with a stab and a cut with a cut. Next is feinting, and what feinting is a fake action designed to get a response out of your opponent that could potentially open them up for an attack. Now, if we were facing real opponents, this would be really easy to do. You would only need to change the direction of your attack, and that would be a feint, and it would be very effective. But since we're facing bots, they don't seem to react to much, but what they do react to is when you enter stabbing mode. This usually makes them back off and play more defensively. So in a sense, we can do feints in half sword by utilizing the stab mode. By entering the stab mode for only short periods of time, we can make our opponent react to our attacks without having to stay in stab mode forever. Now I'm not sure how effective this is actually in half sword. The best case scenario seems to be when the bot bumps into the fence, stunning them just long enough for you to get a clean hit in. So technically, feinting is a viable technique to use in half sword. The next technique is binden, or fencing from the bind, which is all about controlling your opponent's weapon while they're in contact. Now, trying to do this in half sword poses a few problems. Like, you don't have very good tip control in half sword, and the bots just seem to throw attacks at random. So this makes sustained blade contact pretty much impossible. It does seem like against longer weapons, this is much more doable, so you're much more easily able to enter the bind, and then execute other techniques that incorporate binden. But for now, it really just seems like it's up to chance whether you're able to use binden or not. until we get better point control and the bots actually want to fight from the bind. It is possible, but I would not say it's viable because it's not reliable at all. There are times though that you can even do things like Vinden, which is how you twist or shift your sword to push their blade aside and strike through the gap, all while maintaining control over their weapon. But techniques like Vinden are just so ridiculously hard to use in half sword that I've only been able to do them a few times. They're just so inconsistent. I do have a really good example of Vinden here for you guys though. Here I bind against my opponent's weapon on the inside line, then I turn and lift my sword up, stabbing him while simultaneously controlling his weapon, keeping it away from me. And that's just one example of the many ways that you could use Binden to gain an advantage in a fight. Now, Binden does happen a lot whenever you get into a clinch. In modern fencing, they call this korakor, which literally means body to body. Which brings us to our next technique, Ringen Armschwert, or wrestling at the sword. And this is any pushing, shoving, grappling, throwing that you do while sword fighting. And it happens a lot in half sword. You get too close to your opponent, or they have a shield, a spear, you need to get close and personal, things get messy, and that is exactly what the Ringen Armschwert is. In real life, there's actual moves that you can use, but in half sword, it's not nearly as glorious and cool. It's more like wrestling with your deranged uncle in the backyard rather than tactical takedowns. There can be some pretty cool moments, but most of the time, that's just pretty random. But that doesn't matter because it's still a very viable technique to use, especially if you're going against somebody with a spear or a shield, or both. What I find works especially well is to grab one of their arms, disabling it, and then you can stab them with your weapon. But let me know what kind of Ringen Armschwert you guys do, and what works best for you down in the comments. The next technique is called the remise, or the redouble. It's when you launch another attack immediately after your first attack either misses or gets parried. And this works great because you can catch your opponent off guard when either a new line of attack opens or the same one does. And you're not punished for spamming a second hit because timing and distance is the only thing that matters in half sword because we don't have things like animation cooldowns. I would definitely say this is a very viable technique to use in half sword because even if you're randomly flailing about, you're still doing a remise. There is a very similar concept in German longsword fencing called Knocklot, which is an extremely useful tactic to use in half sword. It means afterblow, and similar to the remise, it's a quick follow-up attack after your initial strike, but the attack doesn't have to miss or get parried for you to strike again. So it's about maintaining pressure and initiative. So say you hit your opponent, but you haven't disabled them. Well, you can go in for another attack to finish them off, and keep attacking as long as you need until you win the fight. And that's exactly what you want to do in half sword to keep them from recovering or counterattacking. Now here's an example here where my opponent just attacked me, and I parry and then repost. But then he drops his guard, and so instead of retreating or playing defensively, I actually do a remise / Knocklot. So yes, we're using real fencing techniques all the time in half sword, even if you didn't realize it. And despite the restrictive movement in half sword, we're actually able to do many more techniques than what I showed. Like even the 5 Meisterhau or Master Strikes, which in case you want to learn how to do those in half sword, I have a video right here.